Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening. You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 9. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 4 all-new tales to terrify you. All of them from author Christa Carmen, written just for this program, about graveside, gifts, ominous organs, disturbing dreams, and odd automatons. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 spine-tingling stories. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show is about to begin. Our first tale tonight from Christa Carmen is about a lonely old man, a faithful husband, going to deliver an anniversary gift for his long-deceased wife. He's never forgotten a date and has always managed to find just the right gift. Without further ado, I present to you Paper, Platinum, Stone. On what would have been our 50th anniversary, I bought you a marble headstone. Stone is the recommended gift for 90 years of marriage, but my being around another 40 is a gamble for which the odds are too long. Gold is the traditional gift for 50 years together, but you've no use for a gold necklace or earrings. I walked across the cemetery, still not entirely sure how to explain my recent purchase. You've been gone for 12 years, and though I've visited your grave each April, I never felt the need to mark the occasion with a headstone before. It must be the sentimentality that comes with getting older. That and the fact that you've been on my mind constantly over the last few weeks. A particularly sweet-smelling book, or the feel of dry or warm sheets against my face, and you're there in the room with me, close and yet maddeningly out of reach. As our 50th anniversary drew near, a poignant reminder of the time I've spent alone, memories of you were as abundant as the pollen coating the deck rails and windowsills in spring. Grief is an unending process, a lengthy decay of the weight-bearing pillars of our soul, and my grief for you has been as complex as the most Baroque of architectures. I thought picking out a headstone would provide some measure of closure. Instead, it has triggered that decay to progress with a newfound flourish. The cemetery where you're buried is empty of other visitors. A light breeze disturbs the boughs of a nearby copse of pines. As I approach the spot, now marked with a glittering black marble marker, memories, pleasant, bitter, and otherwise, swirl through my brain like frantic birds. Hi, I say as I kneel, because it feels strange not to say anything. I run a finger along the numbers depicting the 2 short years of your life. The grass around the marker is patchy and uneven. The groundskeeper must have realized his blunder, for seeds, like oblong insects, pepper the upset dirt. Happy anniversary, I continue and gesture at the marker. If you're still around and haunting this cemetery, you're likely surprised by the addition. I suppose 50 was a number I simply couldn't ignore. There's no answer, of course. Had this been a movie, the lonely widower in an abandoned graveyard would have been answered by a murder of cawing crows, as if to punctuate its resistance to macabre cliché. The sun emerges from behind a cloud and bathes the cemetery in light. I know you always found my adherences to the rules of consumerist-driven anniversary gifts funny, I say. But there were at least a handful of years you played along, so I figured maybe you'd humor me with this one, too. I pause, thinking my next statement through before I say it, as if I'm not free to sit here and ramble all day. Everyone deserves to be remembered, I think. To not disappear as if they never existed. Even someone like you, my sweet. Even someone who's done the things you've done. I believe this is true, but the moment I speak it, I feel a glut of anxiety in my stomach. Who am I to deliver you pardon? To excuse your innumerable lies? I changed the subject. The headstone is probably the nicest gift I ever gave you. It's the most expensive, at least. Unless you count what I offered up the last time we spoke, our 20th anniversary in '91. I stop, suddenly feeling truly stupid. Why am I sitting here talking to a rock? I lean on one hand, preparing to rise, to leave whatever dirt my heels kick up where it falls. But my muscles clench before I can fully stand. There's one last question I want to pose. It's not really for you. Like I said, I'm talking to a rock. But one I need to ask myself. I think I knew the answer to it once, long ago, when your transgressions were still far in your future and even farther in mine. It's not, how could I not have known? I ask myself that one already. It isn't even, did I worry you'd plan for the same fate for me? I asked myself that one too, though it hardly mattered. A rustling sound comes from somewhere behind me. I stiffen, and this time I do climb to my feet. A young man carrying an impressive flower arrangement makes his way along a footpath. He smiles sadly at me as he passes, as if we share a secret or are joined by loss. How to convey with just a look that I do not deserve his smile? Whomever he is visiting is surely worthy of his sorrow. Whomever he grieves for could not have hurt him the way you hurt me. Easier to just return the gesture. Let him believe he understands my purpose in this place. Looking down at your marble marker, the question returns, setting my soul on fire, filling my limbs and face with heat. Before I can ask it, I need to be certain I've overlooked nothing, to go over everything again. I sink to the ground once more and lean my back against your headstone. Crossing my legs at the ankles, I close my eyes, picture our old house on Theodore Street, and let thoughts of earlier anniversaries overtake me. We have nothing but each other during our first year of marriage. married, so when you ask what I want for an anniversary gift, I choose something inexpensive. Cigars would be perfect, I say before planting a kiss on your lips. They qualify paper, and those little brevas are only 10 cents apiece. You twirl away from me when I try to kiss you again. Maybe you'll even smoke a few with me, I tease. That depends, you say, smiling devilishly. If you butter me up with a really wonderful gift, I could be convinced. I keep my expression inscrutable, though I know you'll adore the flowers hidden on the top shelf of the bedroom closet. I had them handcrafted from the pages of your favorite novel, Daphne du Maurier's The House on the Strand. When I do give them to you at dinner that evening, I do so without preamble or fanfare. I simply sweep them from the chair beside me and hold them under your pretty little nose. Your eyes widen in surprise, then narrow as you try to determine what it is you're seeing. Slowly, you lift your hand, take the wire stems from mine, and risk a tentative sniff. Are they made from a book? I nod and tell you which one. Your mouth falls open before curling into a smile. What a wonderful gift. I guess I'm going to have to smoke one of those cigars with you after all. As it happens, however, we make love after dinner and stay between the sheets rather than venture out onto the balcony. The cigars lay forgotten on my dresser until a blistering evening at the end of July, when I wake to the smell of smoke and find you holding one between elegant fingers on the moonlit back porch. It is midnight. You'd still been out when I'd gone to bed. One of the women from your office celebrated a birthday at a nearby bar. I can't remember the colleague's name, but I'm not the suspicious type. I've always been fine with you doing your own thing. What are you doing out here? I ask playfully. You continue staring off into the distance. The end of the cigar glows like the eye of a monster peering out from the glass of a Hollywood screen. Celebrating, you finally say, just when I've started to wonder if something's wrong. Oh, I respond. Still in a festive mood after the party? A small, strange smile spreads across your face. You pry your eyes from that distant house to look at me, and for a second, I feel like I don't know you at all. Just a job well done, nothing at all that exciting. I shrug, thinking you're drunk and waxing philosophical. Okay then, I'm going back to bed. Good night. You say nothing in return, but in the morning when I go outside, the butt, stained with a ring of peach lipstick, lies crushed on the otherwise pristine deck. The ashes look like the remnants of a small but destructive fire, and though I can't put my finger on why, it concerns me that you've discarded it so unceremoniously, with so little regard for the mess you've made. I sweep the cigar into my hand and go back into the house. I mean to throw it into the trash, but it ends up in a box atop my bureau instead. We'd been married 14 years when you casually mentioned moving. You claim it was my idea to leave Theodore Street, but that simply is not true. I smile and pat your hand. If you need a change, darling, who am I to insist otherwise? We can contact a realtor this afternoon. I say we, but I mean you, since I'm swamped with work. Besides, you're better at things like this. If we are going to move, I chime in helpfully from the doorway later. When you're on the phone with Sandy from Remax, we might as well go all out like Chicago or Milwaukee. You look at me like I'm crazy and wave me away. I hear you telling Sandy Foxborough sounds lovely, and that we'd love to check out other towns south of the city. When we leave Boston for Brockton, I'm still miffed we didn't try for something farther. What's the point of moving if you're not going to make a truly fresh start? Still, you seem buoyed by the 1.5 acres and spacious garage, and we're putting the finishing touches on the new house, laying rugs and hanging planters, when I realize our 15th anniversary is a mere 3 days away. I have to search several bookcases to find where you've shelved Emily Post's Etiquette. Chapter 22 relays that the traditional gift for the year 15 is crystal. I consider new glassware, photo frames, candlestick holders, and a crystal clock for the mantel. Ultimately, I decide that simpler is better, and choose a Waterford vase. It's in the center of the table and filled with yellow roses come April 7th, when you arrive home after a long day of work and an overdue trip to the market. You squint in confusion, then smile, but the smile turns to panic. The emotions rippling across your face like swells beneath the sea. Is today? Oh God, it is. I can't believe I forgot. I'm so sorry, Stephen. I go to you quickly and wrap you up in my arms. No need to apologize. All is forgiven. I know how busy you've been lately, how much the new job has taken out of you. The only thing I want this year is for you to be happy. Maybe once things settle down, we can take a vacation together. When you pull away, there are tears in your eyes. Oh, Steve, you really mean it? That would be wonderful. I know I said I was okay with moving, but it's been hard to get situated. You're with the same company and travel so much for work anyway, so it's been easier for you. A vacation would be such a welcome distraction. There you go again with your inexplicable insistence that it was me who wanted to move. You're emotional enough, however, so I don't point this out. You go to the table and run your fingers over the vase. It's beautiful. I really love it. And what a unique pattern. It's an extra-large, deep-cut style, I explain. It makes the vase really durable and subsequently a little heavy. If it cuts too harsh a line for you, I can take it back and get something more delicate. Oh, absolutely not. It's staying right where it is. You pause. In fact, when these roses lose their luster, I'll replace them with the paper ones from our first anniversary. I smile and give you a kiss, but this, of course, is not what happens. Life has a way of separating you from your best intentions. We never went on that vacation. We were too busy, too tired. You were right. I did travel a lot for work, and when I was home, we never really mustered up the motivation to go away. The vase made its way from the table to a kitchen cabinet, and from there to the floor of a crowded hallway closet. That's why I was surprised when, approximately 10 months later, I saw a glimmer that turned out to be a Waterford vase beneath the bathroom sink. Wondering if you knocked it over in the closet and stowed it here to hide a crack, I hold it up for inspection. The vase is indeed splintered down the center, but it's hard to make out the extent of the damage due to the square-cut pattern. I draw the vase closer, trying to determine if there is colored light refracting from the glass, or is that blood caught in the zigzag fractures and the grooves between the squares? Startled, I almost dropped the heavy glass piece, but managed to steady it with my left hand. As I peel my right hand from its base, several strands of hair, the ends matted with bits of flesh, come away with my clammy fingers. And yet, I say nothing to you about the vase. The next time I look for it, it's gone. I think about it in relation to other gifts I gave you, the cotton sheets you threw away, claiming you must have stained them with your period, leather gloves that looked to have gone through war, lace lingerie that disappeared from dresser drawers, and silver knives from kitchen cabinets. I spend the next 5 years making excuses for your behavior, until the truth is discovered, like a corpse beneath a cover of leaves, and there are no more excuses that can be made to fit. At noon on our 20th anniversary, the door to the courthouse slams shut behind me. The mass of reporters outside is like nothing I've ever seen. This way, Mr. Gardner. Your lawyer waves at me from the other side of the metal detector. I place my wedding ring and keys in a basket and step through. How are you today? He asks as I follow him down the corridor. Is this a serious question? I mumble that I'm fine. We go up a flight of stairs and down another corridor, stopping outside the doors of a room far removed from any hubbub. I understand you wish to speak to Marisol alone, but given the charges, you must understand that we cannot grant you your request. There are officers stationed at the end of the hallway. He gestures, and I see the men, beefy as professional wrestlers, and as head of Marisol's legal team, he continues, I'll be in the room the entire time. I trust you'll be able to carry out whatever business you have, with her in my presence. I stare at him blankly. Whatever business I have with you. Does this imbecile realize I'm your husband of 2 decades? I understand you'll be in the room. I trust, however, that you will allow us to converse without unnecessary interference. The lawyer sighs and gestures toward the door, as if he's already regretting this arrangement. I push it open and step inside. My jaw drops when I see you. You're sitting at the far end of a large conference table, your dark brown hair pulled in a bun. Your face is drawn and extremely pale. Your lips are dry and bloodless. You're wearing a bright orange jumpsuit like something out of a crime drama, and your hands are shackled together and folded in your lap. Hi, I say as I sit, because it feels strange not to say anything. You stare at me, your face a mask of hatred that I just can't understand. Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look well. Are you eating what they're providing? You don't answer, but your mouth grows more pinched, as if you've swallowed something rank. This isn't my fault, you know, I say quietly, trying to sound understanding. I've been as supportive as possible, even now, and I never gave the police anything on you. Your green eyes narrow as your mouth moves, but I can't hear the words you've spoken. What was that? I ask, leaning forward, cursing the length of the table. The only 2 chairs have been positioned as far away from one another as possible. I said, it is your fault. We both know that, though there's no point in saying so now. I frown and place both hands on the table, struggling to quell the trembling. Honey, I know you feel like everyone's turned on you, but staying angry at me will get you nowhere. I can't help that police isolated cells from a cigar near one of the victims that matched your DNA. There were driver's licenses taped to the insides of the pottery I got you for our 9th anniversary, and victims' teeth wrapped in the wool scarf I gave you for our 7th. I had to let them search the house. You know they had a warrant. I even hid the Waterford vase, wanting to help you any way I could. Yes, you did hide it, in my hope chest. How very helpful of you, darling. Your voice is spiked with bitterness, but also a splash of resignation. You know there's no way around the evidence that ensnares you. I love you, I say. I've always loved you, and I've only ever tried to support you. You wanted to move, I agreed to move. I had no idea you were putting distance between yourself and your crimes. I traveled for work and gave you your space. I never asked questions. I bought you a gift for every anniversary, something thoughtful I believed you'd like. You seem as if you want to speak. There's something like outrage on your face, but you can't hold on to your indignation, and your features reclaim their defeated air. Hurry through here, Stephen. I'd like to be taken back to jail. You pause, curiosity suddenly transforming your face, turning you into the woman I married. Why did you want to see me in the first place? It's a reasonable question, but I have a good answer for why I wanted to visit you in this depressing place. I stand and step toward you, then look back at the lawyer, but he's immersed in the contents of a file. As I walk toward you, I slipped a wedding ring off my finger. Without it, my hand feels unfinished, an amorphous alien thing. When I reach your chair, I hold it out with a wistful smile, remembering when I first donned it. An incredulous laugh escapes your lips, and I realize you think I'm asking you for a divorce. No, I say. Hurt you'd think I'd ever abandoned you, let alone in your time of need. I'm giving you this as a reminder of my love, your platinum anniversary gift. You pull your handcuffed wrists closer to your chest. I don't need your ring, but I want you to have it. The etiquette book practically demands it, and it's bad luck to break the tradition. I reach out, grab your hand, and slip the ring onto your thumb. It's a little loose, but I trust it won't fall off. You stand so abruptly you upset your chair. We're done here, you tell your lawyer. He looks up, startled, and nods. Despite your brusqueness, you don't look at the ring or move to take it off your finger. A wave of satisfaction washes over me. Your lawyer picks up the phone from the desk against the wall. A moment later, the officers from the hallway come to escort you through the courthouse. I imagine you exiting out the back, avoiding reporters and victims' families, to a windowless van marked prisoner transport, idling beside the curb. But your departure from the room marks the occasion of the last time I ever saw you. The last time I gazed upon a face I regarded almost every day for 20 years. Of course, I see you frequently on television and in newspapers, your downcast eyes and perpetually slumped shoulders plastered beneath the gruesome headlines. Epicene eviscerator, monoclonous murderer, and vicious vixen are names with which the media alternately christens you due to the ruthless nature of your crimes and your indiscriminate method of selecting victims. The name that sticks, however, is one I can't help but be fond of, for it encompasses your relation with me within its otherwise brutal connotations. While every anniversary card you ever gave me was signed, your loving Marisol, even I started to think of you as the butcher bride of Boston. I shift where I sit, my back aching against the marble. The sun has sunk considerably, and the cemetery is steeped in lengthening shadows. Groaning, I sit forward, turn onto my knees, and attempt to commit to memory the image of your headstone, framed by rows of other monuments. It will likely be the last time I ever look upon the scene. Massachusetts had not had the death penalty since 1947, but your cancer was as fatal as any electrocution or injection. When the news broke that you died, media outlets ran an endless parade of features, rehashing the details of your crimes for a new generation of consumers. My phone number has been unlisted, my identity obscured for so long that I didn't have to worry about reporters calling or sending emails. There's nothing new to say anyway, or perhaps nothing I'd want to share with them. No one's curiosity warrants my pain. No one else deserves our secrets. The young man whom I saw earlier passes again, having concluded his visit with the dearly departed, arms empty of vibrant flowers. It's another reminder of the approaching evening and that I've come here for a purpose. Another reminder of duties beyond those of your grief-stricken, loving husband. The request for cigars, the blood-stained sheets, the leather gloves I returned to your Accord's compartment time and time again. The crystal vase I stashed in a blackout, only to be given the opportunity to hide it again. The platinum wedding ring belonging to one of my victims that so resembled my own, a ring that I placed, like a nail in a coffin, upon your elegant, restrained hand. All of it forms the answer to a question I'd known I'd pose again. Would there come a time in which I'd be permitted to return to my old ways? Satisfied that the answer is yes, and that the time for it is now, I bow my head, in case you're still around and haunting this cemetery, and bid you fond farewell. Enjoy your last anniversary gift, I say, feeling sentimental all over again. And I hope you won't forget the other presents. I put so much thought into everyone. I hope you enjoyed Paper Platinum Stone, as written by author Christa Carmen and performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that first tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented feature author, you can help support them by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Carmen. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/Carmen, spelled C-A-R-M-E-N. That'll redirect you to the author's profile on our fantastic horror fiction website, creepypastastories.com, where you'll find links to her books, website, and social media, as well as a handy contact form in case you'd like to get in touch with her to say hello, ask a question, or show appreciation for her work. Thanks again for your support of this program and of tonight's featured author. Now, it's time for another dose of the dreadful. You may be familiar with the motto, "Physician, heal thyself." Well, even though the organ in our second tale, by Christa Carmen, isn't intended for use by the man who's 3D printing it out in his lab, perhaps he will get the healing he truly needs after all. Without further ado, I present to you The Molecules That Bind Us. A layperson might have found it off-putting, but to Dr. Ian Westner, the sound was comforting, nostalgic. It was like something from a Star Wars movie, a combination of R2-D2 passing on some critical message and the Millennium Falcon readying for takeoff. Even a regenerative medicine researcher with more graduate degrees than was prudent could play make-believe, and Ian loved to pretend that the telltale sounds of the custom-designed 3D printer, utilizing a water-based ink to promote the growth of encapsulated cells and printing in alternating layers of biodegradable plastic microchannels, were announcing the approach of a futuristic spacecraft. It was a pleasant, harmless distraction, and one that brought him back to his boyhood days in Erie, Indiana. Ian would wage epic battles with an impressive collection of time-worn action figures, his father agreeing with mock reluctance to play Darth Vader before launching a lethal Death Star attack, Ian scrambling to retaliate while intoning the appropriate soundtrack for the battle between the dark side and the Force with his own vocal cords. Not that the business of the bioprinting lab wasn't sci-fi enough. At that moment, a wet, hissing sound joined the normal beeps and whirs as the printer nozzle sprayed living cells onto a scaffold. Clacking away, he typed up a note on the day's progress, a breakthrough, in Ian's opinion. It had been 5 months since Ian and his partner had implanted small 3D-printed livers into rats, and the tissue was still thriving inside the rodents' bodies. One of the greatest challenges in bioprinting thus far had been getting printed tissue to survive long enough to form blood vessels and nerves, to integrate with the body in which it was implanted. They were approaching the moment when they could attempt this with a full-sized human liver, the printing of which was almost complete, the culmination of 8 weeks' worth of work. Ian finished entering the note, checked 3 times that he had saved it, and logged off the desktop computer. The clock glowed accusatorily above the desk. He hadn't meant to work a 15-hour day. Then again, Ian hadn't meant to work a 15-hour day every day for the last 3 weeks. His research was as addictive as any drug, not that Ian would know. He'd never smoked a cigarette, and too leery of the consequences, had been drunk only a handful of times. He reached for the oversized can of Red Bull. He supposed he couldn't get away with saying his work was his only addiction after all, and gulped several warm, flat swallows. The clanking of the can on the metal desk coincided with another sound, the plop of a half-inch thick tissue sample on the bottom of a stainless steel tray. He approached the second, smaller printer, quiet now as it wound down from its exertions. He'd transfer the specimen to a cooler of dry ice before sealing the styrofoam and relocating the whole container down the hall to the transplant testing laboratory. He labeled the cooler with large, legible letters: Phase 3, Life Cycle 17, Batch 453, Human Bladder, Healthy Cells. Capping the black Sharpie, Ian walked the precious goods to the refrigerator marked, "For 3D printed specimens only, no food allowed." Ian flipped a switch on the overheads. The laser-like glow from the mouth of the still-running printer was the brightest thing in the room. Red light shone on the bottom layer of plastic, creating an impressive imitation of a horror movie monster with a mouthful of blood-stained teeth. Ian chided himself for his overactive imagination and slipped from the lab, locking the door behind him with a fingerprint-activated keypad. There was only one other set of fingerprints the keypad would accept. Ian traversed the long, dimly lit corridor separating the main printing lab from the second, smaller one, both top secret, in the university basement. Punching his father's birthday into a regular numeric keypad allowed him to exit the area marked restricted and enter the gowning station. Ian dropped his lab coat, polypropylene shoe covers, and hairnet into a bin of recyclables on his way to the locker room. The silence was absolute, the weight of it settling over his eardrums with substantial but not unwelcome pressure. Ian turned on the light over an emergency containment alarm pull station. A flash of green exploded as the light bulb blew out. Oh, shit. Ian drew in a breath. He retrieved his cell phone from his pocket and swiped down for the flashlight. There was a switch connected to a generator at the back of the room. If he could only. At the sight of the pale, slight man sitting on the bench in the dark, Ian would have sworn again, but had yet to drag enough air into his lungs. Instead, he bent, hands on his knees, and breathed, adrenaline pulsing through his bloodstream to combat the unwelcome surprise. When he finally stood, he fixed the motionless man on the bench with an exasperated expression. "What are you doing in here, Dr. Averill? I thought you were in B-Lab. And why are you in the dark?" "I'm just thinking." Dr. Graham Averill delivered the reply as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. Of course, Ian thought with disdain. What else would a brilliant, troubled research scientist be doing alone in a dark laboratory basement? Ian checked himself on the inclusion of the word troubled. He had no idea why he thought something troubled Graham. He only knew that this was so. He couldn't attribute this belief to anything Graham had said himself, or anything Ian had heard from another doctor or professor. It was just a fact, as indisputable as the boiling point of water or the chemical composition of any one of the human organs Ian had printed with success. Ian didn't know if Graham Averill had a husband or a wife. He didn't know if he had kids or where Graham had gone to college. He didn't know what type of music his research partner enjoyed, what he did for fun, or what kind of food he liked to eat. The only thing Ian knew about Graham Averill was the make and model of his car, a Delta 88 Oldsmobile Royale Brougham, more beat up than classic. Graham spoke very little and never smiled. Ian suspected that Graham made attempts to stagger their time spent in the lab, a difficult task considering both men logged innumerable hours. When first assigned him and Graham to work together post-residency, Ian for his background in surgery and regenerative medicine, Graham's resume as elusive as anything else, Ian had gone out of his way to get to know him. He posed friendly questions and invited Graham to lunch. He shared solutions to the quirks he discovered within their Metacopia computer system and attempted to co-author early research findings. It wasn't long before Ian gave up on trying to win Graham over. Graham repaid his efforts with one-word replies at best, and grunts or silence at worst. Once Ian caught Graham staring into space and made the mistake of placing a well-meaning hand on the doctor's shoulder. "Hey, Graham, you okay, buddy?" he'd ask. Graham made no indication that he had heard Ian or even sensed his presence in the room. Locked-in syndrome, he thought, rather ridiculously. There was nothing wrong with Graham Averill's nervous system. The man wasn't actually paralyzed, but the idea of Graham trapped in his own head and lacking possession of the key that would release his tongue rattled Ian more than it should have. It reminded him of something he couldn't put his finger on. Reminded him of someone he knew. Ian hadn't been able to shake Graham from his reverie that day, had backed out of the room, leaving the doctor alone with whatever film reel played behind those glazed-over eyes. Graham lacked that locked-in look now. Rather, his eyes bore into Ian's under the beam of the flashlight with glittering intensity. Graham wore a navy dress shirt, somehow still crisp, despite having spent the day beneath the folds of a starchy white lab coat, his keys strewn on the bench by one hand. A surge of anger rose from Ian's stomach to the back of his throat. He swallowed it down with difficulty. Thinking about what? He managed to sound civil, friendly even. What he wanted to say to Graham was this: "Why do you have to be so goddamn creepy all the time?" "Many things," came the underwhelming response. Ian circumnavigated Graham and his vigil of deliberation to the backup light switch, breathing a small sigh of relief as fluorescence chased the shadows from the room. He went to his locker and spun the combination, keeping one eye on Graham. "Do you ever think about what drives your work, Dr. Westner? Whether it's sheer academia that motivates you, or a personal passion that pushes you forward day after day?" Ian tried, and failed, to disguise his shock at this outpouring of words. He stared into Graham's severe, sharply angled face. "Well, Ian stuttered, his tongue trying, and failing, to catch up to the onslaught of questions his brain was churning out. "Sure, I've thought about it. I imagine most doctors, researchers, anyone in a helping profession would be remiss to say they hadn't. That's what you've been thinking about, Dr. Averill? What is it that drives you?" Graham ignored Ian's question. "I was in love with a woman once," Graham continued, "many years ago, who was in grad school to become a mental health counselor. She did her internship at a detox center and thought she wanted to work in the substance abuse field. We were very serious, and I supported her in her career. But one night, she came home from work. At this point, she'd graduated and gotten a job at a treatment center in the city, and said she couldn't do it anymore. She was not in recovery from alcohol or drug addiction herself, Graham continued, and she'd never dealt with a family member or loved one who'd struggled with it either. She said she just didn't have the personal connection to the patients and what they were going through in order to have a passion for the work. Graham looked at Ian then, his expression grave. I left her not long after that. I thought that any woman who could feel that way was a very cold woman indeed. We'd suffered a personal tragedy together as well that convinced me there was no future for us. Do you agree with my decision? Do you agree that to have a passion for your work, you must connect to it on a gut-wrenchingly intimate level? Ian thought before responding. I don't know if I could fault somebody for not being able to dredge up enthusiasm for work they didn't feel passionate about. On the other hand, if it is a personal connection that lights your fire, then that fire is going to burn brighter and stronger than if you sat there, forcing two sticks together for God knows how long, trying to get a spark. God is not here, Graham said. Or at least that's what Ian thought Graham said. Graham's voice was so low, his words so strange, that Ian couldn't be sure. I'm sorry? I said that's what I feared. You see, Dr. Wessner, I've come close to the determination that I was wrong to have dispensed with my former lover so unceremoniously. She was right, had been right all along. In order to do great work, work that will change the course of humanity, your ego, your psyche, your everything has to be tied up in it. The passion has to come from a place so raw and so hungry that to fail would be to die. Ian noticed that Graham's eyes were red-rimmed. Had he been crying? What he said was, "Have you found that passion?" Again, Graham dodged him, turning the question on Ian instead. What drives you, Dr. Wessner? Is it money? Power? Prestige? Or is it something you keep much closer to the vest? Something that perhaps you've never told anyone before? Ian felt a flash of defensiveness. He made a show of checking his watch. It's late, Dr. Averill. I have to be going now. It was nice talking to you. I'll see you in the morning. Well, I guess I'll see you later this morning. Ian corrected. It was after midnight. Have a nice stint away from the lab, however short. He closed the locker and walked into the relatively fresh air of the hallway. Forgoing the elevator for the stairs, Ian climbed to the main floor and slipped out into the rainy night, grateful to be away from Dr. Averill's probing questions. 45 minutes later, Ian watched his garage door rise, fingers drumming on the steering wheel, with nervous impatience. As he walked up the 3 low stairs to the mudroom of his modest 2-floor home, Ian mouthed a silent prayer. He opened the door, braced for signs of chaos to assail him. He didn't have to wait long. The smell of vomit hit first, a sickly sweet smell of fruit that's gone bad in its bowl. Ian dropped his briefcase by the foyer closet and pulled the collar of his shirt over his nose. The refrigerator door hung open, casting an eerie glow over the kitchen, spotlighting the foodstuffs dismembered on the floor. A cracked jar of mustard seeped onto the tile. Bags of deli meat rustled in the breeze of a ceiling fan that circled like a bird of prey. Ian gave the mess a wide berth and made his way to the living room. The lights were off, but the television had been left on, broadcasting muted static. The window was open despite the wind and rain. Ian held the dripping blinds away from the pane and pulled the windows shut. In the damp and empty living room, with the smell of mustard and vomit hanging in the air, Ian called out in a shaky voice, "Dad?" Ian Wessner Sr. did not respond, but then Ian Jr. hadn't expected him to. He commenced with a quick and uniform search for his 68-year-old father. All he found for his troubles was a broken mirror and another pile of vomit. He retraced his steps to the kitchen, simultaneously panicked and numb. The basement door was ajar. How stupid of him to have not checked it earlier. He placed shaky fingers on the knob. The lightweight wood crashed into the wall behind the door when he flung it open. In the wake of the echo, there was nothing but silence from the dark expanse below. Ian flipped the switch, and for the second time that night, a light bulb filament met its end in his presence. He cursed and fished his phone from his pocket. The bouncing strobe of the flashlight gave Ian's descent a surreal, jittery feel. By the time he reached the bottom, his already frayed nerves were shot. "Dad!" He called again. A twinge of anger permeated his fear. "Dad! Come on, are you down here?" A black shadow rushed from one corner, the banshee wail warning Ian of the impending attack half a second before the first blow hit his shoulder. He swung the beam, illuminating a lunatic with rheumy eyes and bared teeth. He felt breath, hot and rancid, against his neck. "Dad! Stop! It's Ian! Dad! Dad!" Ian encircled his father's thin frame to keep him from raising the vodka bottle over his head. Ian Sr. fought like a man possessed or a tiger long confined to a cage and sensing freedom. A moment later, Ian succeeded in wrenching the bottle from his father's bony fingers. He brought him to a prone position on the cold concrete floor. Ian Sr. muttered incomprehensibly. Tears streaked his gaunt face, but the intensity of the moment had passed. Ian felt the adrenaline leaving his body like foaming surf at low tide. He sunk to the ground next to his father's twitching form and let out a hopeless sigh. "Ah, Dad, what am I going to do with you?" He picked up the empty bottle and turned it over in his hands. This impossible bottle, a bottle that should have been down the street, still full on the shelf of Dick's World of Wines. Instead, his father had either stolen or talked someone into buying the cheap grain vodka after Ian had left for work, bringing it back to the home Ian Jr. had moved him into while he waited on the infinite liver transplant list. There was no doubt in Ian's mind that his father would die before getting to the top of that list. It was why he toiled so determinedly at the Frankensteinian work in the lab. Ian had long ago given up on solving the issue of his father's alcoholism. They'd tried it all over the years, first with Ian's mother at the helm, then when Rose passed away at 53, the stress of dealing with her husband's drinking for 27 years, the obvious culprit, Ian had taken over navigating the storm of his father's disease. Nothing had worked, not AA meetings or detox, not antabuse or Vivitrol or naltrexone, not locking him in the basement, restrained to the arm of a hospital cot Ian had borrowed from the university hospital. His father had escaped, as he always did, gotten his hands on some cash, and slogged his sweating and tremulous body to Dick's. Ian Sr. had conquered handcuffs, snowstorms, the DTs, malnutrition, and locked institutions, all in the name of the drink. No, Ian could not conquer his father's alcoholism, but he could conquer the 3D printing of human organs. If the telephone never rang with the news that a liver was available, or if the call did come, they proceeded with the transplant, and Ian Sr. drank through the new liver. Ian could come to the rescue with his 3D printer and surgical skills. Sure, thicker 3D printed organs like livers were years away from human clinical trials, but Ian would take his chances. It was the only solution he saw. It was the only solution there was. The first site that Ian Sr. was gathering his wits about him was a soft, bird-like twitter at the back of his throat. Ian prepared for a second bout of truculence, and his father did sit up, but the vodka had coursed too long in his bloodstream to have any bite. Ian Sr. leaned against his son's shoulder and sobbed. At the sign of surrender, Ian climbed to his feet and helped his father to his. With the effortful, lurching steps, he hoisted his father up the basement stairs, across the first floor and into the bedroom at the back of the house. Ian had converted this room with the express purpose of keeping his father off the stairs when he had too much to drink. He hadn't expected the basement would draw Ian Sr. like a moth to a flame. It was the place Ian's mother had passed, had keeled over in front of the washing machine, dead of a heart attack before she'd hit the floor. Ian Sr. would drink, descend into the dark, and cry in despair for his dead wife. Ian had loved his mother. He loved his father with a tolerance and a perpetuity he'd known for no other. Still, he couldn't help the thought that it was guilt, not grief, which drove his father into the basement every few months. Ian knew the guilt when he saw it. It was the emotion that hit him like a train when he didn't latch the basement door before leaving for work, or left the key in a place from which his bloodhound of a father could sniff it out. His father was all he had left. There were neither siblings nor a significant other. He was the reason Ian went to work every day. But wasn't there a twinge of resentment that manifested each night when Ian lay his head upon his pillow? A trickle of anger, an outflow of self-loathing for having become a slave to his father's drinking and failing liver as much as his father had. A tendril of worry that when he did work up the courage to bring home the man-made liver, it would be the undoing of his medical degree and standing within the university. Ian helped his father into the bed. It was after 3 now, and Ian had wanted to be back at the lab by 6. It had taken well over an hour to get his father bathed and into fresh clothes. Ian was in that over-caffeinated, overtired state in which he spent most of his waking hours, and as he drew the covers up his father's chin, double-checking to make sure an Excedrin and bottle of water were on the nightstand, he doubted he'd be able to sleep at all. His father stared up at the ceiling with eyes that said he was seeing something from which he could not escape, and Ian realized what it was about Graham Averill's vacant expression that bothered him so much. After his father fell asleep, he lingered at the bedroom door, watching the concave chest rise and fall beneath the blanket, imagining, as if with X-ray vision, the diseased liver under the deceptively healthy-looking flesh, biding its time until the moment when it would cease to perform its obligatory functions. Ian shook his head, dispelling the noxious thought, and padded toward the kitchen to make a cup of tea. If he fell asleep, wonderful. If not, the chamomile would keep him company during the loneliest part of the night, when dawn seemed as unlikely as the prospect of farming 3D-generated organs once had. Ian noticed Graham's Oldsmobile was already in the lot, but Graham was gone from the locker room, and his A-Lab workstation was free from its usual chaos. Graham had been spending more and more time in B-Lab, but this didn't bother Ian. He puzzled over Graham's motivations only, until he'd grown up and busied himself with preparations for the day. Also expelled by the ho-hum of routine was the fight with his father that morning. Ian had locked the basement door and added the key to his ring, under Ian Sr.'s reproachful eye. "There a reason you locking that door? Can't see why my own son would try to control me like that." And they'd been off, tearing into each other, their words so saturated with venom it was enough for Ian's coffee to curdle in his stomach. His father's heated exposition had culminated in a coughing fit. Ian pretended not to see the shock of red against the white of the handkerchief he brought to his mouth. Several days out of a month, be it a full moon, a change in mood, or a failure to come up with the funds, Ian would come home to find his father sober. Ian knew that today would not be one of those days. Concentrate, he chided himself. There'll be plenty of time later to deal with whatever mess he creates. And so the morning passed. Lunchtime went by unnoticed, and afternoon turned into evening. Ian was contemplating an atypical but vaguely familiar beeping coming from the largest 3D printer, the one that had been employed with the printing of a human liver over the last 8 weeks, when he realized Graham had never even popped in. His work in B-Lab was obviously all-consuming. Ian wondered what it could be. He walked over to the printer and inspected its output. He almost fell over at what he saw. There was a reason he hadn't recognized the beep right away. It was the sound of the printer announcing the liver's completion. An earlier end time by 2 days, and Graham wasn't around. If he acted now, he could take the organ home completely unobserved. He'd simply implement his plan of leaving the lab door unlocked for just one night. He'd tell Graham the printing was a failure, and if the university ever noticed cellular material and organ input didn't add up for April, which they weren't likely to do, there'd be one night in question when a custodian, student, professor, or another researcher could have accessed the lab. Ian went to the cage in the corner of the room. The largest rat was up on its hind legs, drinking from the water bottle's metal straw. All the rats were bright-eyed and energetic. Ian thought of the blood in his father's handkerchief again. He went back to the printer and laid a hand on the mass of plastic, a $200,000 machine worth so much more than the sum of its parts. This machine had created something that would save his father's life, something that would save Ian Sr. from himself. It was as incredible and fantastical as the plot of the Star Wars movies he and his father of his childhood so loved. Ian pulled at the latex of his gloves and paced the room, staring at the newborn organ and hardly believing what he was about to do. Before he lost his nerve and subsequently this opportunity, he placed the liver onto a bed of dry ice and then into a styrofoam cooler. He shut down the computer but left the lab in its usual disarray. Nothing to divert from his routine. Forcing himself not to sprint down the hall, Ian held the cooler in front of him with purpose. There were no cameras in the basement corridors, thus the reason for his and Graham's full-on security clearance. Through the anteroom and past his locker, Ian did not stop to collect his coat. Without looking behind him, without running into Graham, Ian took his prize and left the building. Now that he held his father's salvation in his presence, he had a week or so to act. It was this decrease in pressure, this feeling of having a window, however small, that allowed Ian to relax enough to realize he'd activated the keypad when leaving the lab. He knew there was a chance of getting caught regardless of the measures that he took. Did going back to unlock the door really matter? 12 years of dedication to pursuing numerous medical degrees, Ian was loath to lose, told him that of course it did. He brought the Impala to a screeching halt, swung a wide U-turn, and sped back toward Miskatonic University. The first thing he noticed was that Graham's Oldsmobile was still on the lot. Avoiding him a second time in one night would be no easy task. Ian disregarded the gowning station and was about to turn left toward A-Lab when he was stopped short by the sound. It came from the right side of the basement, the site of the second, smaller lab, and Ian wondered how he hadn't noticed it earlier. It was the same beeps and whirs of a large 3D printer, one tasked with a job far larger than a tissue sample. Ian and Graham had both worked on the formation of cells, that were the basis of the organ now hidden in Ian's trunk, but never had one of the men taken it upon themselves to instigate a large-scale organ job without the other's knowledge. Ian broke into a sweat. One instance of cellular material and organ output not adding up for April could be a mistake, an erroneous loading of matter into the feed. But 2 superfluous jobs in a single month might draw the attention of Miskatonic's higher-ups. Ian could get fired, or worse, investigated. Panic flew in and took hold. He started jogging, then sprinting, toward the other end of the basement, intent on turning the printer off. He was inside the Lab B anteroom, 3 feet from the door, when Dr. Graham Averill stepped out from behind a supply closet, blocking Ian's path. "Jesus!" Ian exclaimed. Bile rose like a tidal wave while his heart took a nosedive. "Graham, you scared the shit out of me." Dr. Averill stared, his mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "I could ask you the same. Hadn't you gone home for the day?" Yes, I had, but I forgot something," Ian finished. The excuse was hollow, even to his ears. "Tell me," Graham replied, "for I'm quite interested. Have you thought about our conversation yesterday? About where your passion lies? It is not in research papers, of that I'm sure. You gave up quite quickly on requests for me to co-author work. Is it a sick wife at home, or perhaps a child, whose suffering spurs you forward like a whip to a horse?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Ian whispered. "Of course you do. Let's not play games. Who's the liver for?" Ian closed his eyes and struggled not to sink to the floor. He felt as if he had plunged his hands into a cooler of dry ice. "How did you know? I was alone. I worked fast. How could you have known?" "I told you that those who harbor the greatest passion are driven by a personal motive. One passionate, desperate man recognizes his mirror image in another." Ian could only stare. "You've been in pain for quite some time," Graham said. "I know something troubles you because something troubles me. It eats away at me every second of every day, and God is no witness to my plight." Graham's eyes traveled upward, and though they stopped on the emergency sprinkler system, Ian could tell that wasn't what they were seeing. While Graham spoke, molecules of Ian's brain rearranged themselves to accommodate this new information. Like a foolish boy with his head in a science fiction novel, it never occurred to him that Graham saw through his veneer. The printer chuffed from behind the door, startling him from these thoughts. It was a noise he had never heard before. Graham was still studying Ian. "Was I correct in my hypothesis? Is the liver for your son or daughter?" "My father," Ian choked out. "He's an alcoholic. He doesn't have much time." "I see," Graham said. His tone was not ironic, but conveyed utter comprehension. By mastering the 3D printing of a liver, in conjunction with your background as a surgeon, you'll always have the solution to a drinking problem that may never end. How remarkable. Graham stepped back and turned the latch of the supply closet door. The task was maddening in its ordinariness. Inside the lab, the printer rocked like a mechanical bull in the bar that was his father's favorite, erratic, forceful, relentless. Ian squinted but could only see the shadow of the printer from his angle beside the door frame. Graham put a hand on his shoulder and Ian jumped. "Don't worry, Dr. Wessner. Your secret is safe with me. Go home and do not concern yourself with covering your tracks." Graham picked up a pair of gloves and a medical device that Ian knew, but in his disorientation couldn't place. "Forceps?" Graham placed one hand on the doorframe and the other on the knob, his body language clear. He was ready for Ian to leave him so he could get to work. When Ian made no move to go, Graham turned back to him and said, "I mean it, Ian. Get home to your father." He smiled. Like a monkey in a lab imitating the facial expressions of its handler, Ian smiled back. He was about to ask why Graham was doing this for him when understanding struck, as intense as what his father must have experienced when he made his way into a basement and realized all over again that his wife was dead. "What are you making in there?" Ian asked. His voice was shrill, then rather wildly. "What passion drives your printing, Doctor?" Graham's smile turned wistful. Another chuff from the printer tray behind him. He made a half-turn as if to go to it, but spun back and held Ian's gray irises with his green ones. "The woman who couldn't find compassion for her substance abuse patients," he said. "She and I lost a child. She got over it. I told you she was cold. But I never could." He turned with purpose now, toward the miracle-working 3D printer. "Now I won't have to try." Graham went to retrieve his creation. The door swung on airy hinges. It traveled past its frame, and in the interlude before reversing its trajectory, Ian heard something farther. The sound betrayed its origin, though it was far from a perfect replication. The sound paid homage to both human and machine. I hope you enjoyed The Molecules That Bind Us by author Christa Carmen, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed the tales you've heard tonight, I'd like to remind you one last time that tonight's featured author can be found by visiting our website. Just visit simplyscarypodcast.com/Carmen. Once more, that's simplyscarypodcast.com/Carmen, spelled Carmen. And while you're on her author profile, be sure to check out her books for sale on Amazon, particularly her debut collection of tales, the 2018 Indie Horror Book Award-winning anthology, Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked. In Christa's Nightmare Menagerie, you'll find more than a dozen terrifying tales. Among them, a young woman's fears regarding the gruesome photos appearing on her cell phone proved justified in a ghastly and unexpected way. A bride-to-be comes to wish that the door between the physical and spiritual worlds had stayed shut on All Hallows' Eve. And a mother abandons a life she no longer recognizes as her own to walk up a mysterious staircase in the woods, and so much more. Again, the title of the book is Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked. Pick up your copy on Amazon today. Just search for it by name. You won't be sorry you did, and please, if you enjoy it, leave the author a kind word and a 5-star review, and let her know you heard about the book here on this show. It would mean a lot to me. Thanks again for your support of this show and of tonight's featured author. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me on this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page, or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring Twice the Terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, All of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky and get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?